Well, week 2 of college football has managed to outdo what we saw in week 1. Nothing but craziness. Absolute nonsense. We've got a lot to talk about today. Going to be recapping the outcomes of a lot of the big games, some of the big storylines. Anyone who is hopping in either in the live, wants to drop a comment, we'll get to those at the end. Or you just want to share your thoughts and you're watching the replay, feel free to drop a comment below as well. Also, make sure you are hitting that like button on this video. So, week 2 of college football has successfully managed to undo any of my understanding of what to expect this season. I don't think it is too far of a stretch to say that already in week 2, this is one of the most wild and unexpected college football seasons that we've witnessed. And it's full proof the fact that we had 3 Sun Belt upsets that occurred, with Appalachian State beating Texas A&M, with Marshall beating Notre Dame, and then the last one, the grand one that gave us the news that we got today, which is Georgia Southern beating Nebraska. And then ultimately, that gets us the result that Scott Frost, Nebraska's head coach, has been fired. So I want to start with that before I recap any of these games, because that is the big headline today that came out. I know that we've got a whirlwind of NFL action that is going on right now, and there are a lot of crazy games that happened, and this slate of NFL games has been fantastic. But Nebraska tries to sneakily, drop in there on Sunday that they're getting rid of Scott Frost, almost as if it's an attempt to bury the headline a little bit. But us, amongst the college football crazies, those that love college football, we're paying attention. Of course, we are here to react and talk about Scott Frost's firing. It is long overdue, and I think it is hilarious in a way that they chose to spend $7.5 million more than they needed to in buying him out by not waiting 3 weeks to fire him. And I think that this was the right mode of action. This was the right decision to get rid of Scott Frost, because you lose to Georgia Southern, and that's the final nail in the coffin. That is the final level of embarrassment, to lose to a team that you paid to come play you in your home stadium to prepare you for the more important games on your schedule. I said this, and we're going to talk about and re-up on my point that I talked about with the Marcus Freeman stuff yesterday. Now that I've had some time to think about it, if you lose to a Sun Belt team, that or an FCS team, that is the fullest form of embarrassment, and also biggest proof of ineptitude and lack of ability to rally your team and prepare them on a week-to-week basis, especially to play against important, tough opponents, in conference opponents especially. To lose to Georgia Southern in the fashion that they did, in a high-scoring manner, to allow that many points to a decent Georgia Southern team. It was a quality team, not an App State who's actually really, really good and underrated. That Georgia Southern team's okay. But we now have the result that I talked about after week 0 that should have happened long before the start of this season, during the offseason, that Scott Frost is now fired. The direction that we now have to look is who do you hire? I think that Scott Frost made the most sense, which is what makes this so complicated, is that Scott Frost was the savior for this program. He was a former starting quarterback at Nebraska. He was leading a UCF team that was unjustifiably dominant, a team that was not supposed to be good and was good enough to be undefeated for a season. He was able to produce really good results before he came to Nebraska. So that perfect hiring not working out now becomes a head scratcher of what do you do next to start over for this football program. I am of the belief, if you are a reputable, recognizable college football program now in the NIL era, after what USC did in paying Lincoln Riley to come to him, you need to find the money to maybe not get an A-list coach and coerce them away from a big program. They're not going to be able to steal anyone from the SEC. That's just not going to happen at a program like Nebraska. But you could go and get like a B or a C list coach that is an up and comer. I think that the two top people that are in the mix for Nebraska that need to start being discussed are Matt Campbell from Iowa State, who just won a very tight battle against Iowa, a rival in Iowa, or Luke Fickell from Cincinnati. They are both coming from football programs in similar, not the same, but similar areas of location in terms of quality of program in which you're trying to translate to your program now at Nebraska. You want hardworking, hard-nosed football players. You don't need to be a team that is going and getting five-star recruits. What is going to make Nebraska good is what other programs like Wisconsin in the Big Ten makes them good, is developing and coaching up talented three-star recruits that maybe are a couple years behind and then just need that time for physical development, need the time for strength and conditioning in their first 2 years, and then they get on the field and they do really, really well. That is the results that you want to produce. And I look at what Matt Campbell has done at Iowa State. I look at what Luke Fickell has done in Cincinnati. Those are the results that they have produced. Taking guys, and understandably, they have gotten some high recruits, like Myjai Sanders was a high recruit that Luke Fickell got to Cincinnati. But getting those lower tier recruits, those three-star guys, and developing them is what is going to help Nebraska get better and turn into the results that is going to make this an actually winning football program in the future. It is going to take time. This is a rebuild situation, though. I have to say this. This is a rebuild situation that is not going to be immediate takeover and immediately start winning. That is not a team like this. The results that Scott Frost has produced has caused this program to regress. That roster is very bare bones there. And I said this when I was demanding that he be fired after that week 0 loss, when he wasn't, that there are no even NFL quality players on that roster. There are not enough good players on that Nebraska team right now. There is nobody that is worth being drafted that is worth naming. And I'm not saying that arbitrarily. I do NFL draft research. Anyone who watches any of the other content on the show, on this channel, knows that I do NFL draft evaluations, and I keep my nose to the ground for guys that are draftable quality players. And there's not a single draftable player on that Nebraska roster. This is going to take some time. This is going to take a couple of years before they transition. And the way that you're going to do that is finding a guy and picking a guy that has rebuilt a program that was struggling. And the two best options that you have are Matt Campbell from Iowa State and Luke Fickell from Cincinnati. If it's anyone outside those two, I think that could be a total misfire. And I'm sure that there are names that I'm not considering for this Nebraska opening. There are probably options that are going to come out and be on the table for this job. But right now, based on what we saw and what we've seen already since week 2, Matt Campbell and Luke Fickell are the best options for both for Nebraska moving forward. I think on that note, I want to just reiterate a point that I made about the Notre Dame Marshall game. So I came on and I think a lot of Notre Dame fans, I was pissed off. I was really pissed off. And if you didn't watch that video, I encourage you to do it, because I think every Notre Dame fan was upset. Even the ones that were supporting Marcus Freeman were still upset at the result. Losing in your first home opener, the first home game of the season, you lose to Marshall. One of the 3 Sun Belt upsets that happened this weekend. That's disgraceful. That's pathetic. That is a game that there was a clip of him talking about, he was already assuming it was a win. I forget his exact quote, but it was him talking to fans saying that we're going to start off this era with a victory at home. That was something along the lines of what he said in that clip. And I want to go find that clip and get the exact quote. But that to me shows he didn't properly prepare his team for Marshall. That shows that they were not ready to play and they were overlooking who they had to play next. And I don't want to spend too much time harping on this because I already unleashed all my thoughts on this. I still stand by my original take. I still stand by the fact that if you can't win in your first home game against a Sun Belt team, we're not talking about an ACC opponent. If they lost to Boston College or they lost to Virginia Tech, which are not good teams, but an ACC opponent, I don't think I'd be as upset. I'd be mad and I wouldn't be calling for his head. I'd say, you know what, give him some time. But you lost to a Sun Belt team. You lost to a Sun Belt team with four. I said three yesterday, but you have four guys on that roster that are going to be top 50 NFL draft picks in Jarrett Patterson, Brandon Joseph, Michael Mayer, and Isaiah Foskey. You could also throw in Cam Hart in there, which is a fifth guy. That is a talented roster that was 11-2 last year that did not lose that many guys. The apologists for Marcus Freeman have been saying this, and I think it's so soft that this is the argument, that Lou Holtz had a losing record at the beginning of his career. Nick Saban had a losing record at the beginning of his tenure at Alabama. And I believe somebody even pointed out that they lost to Southern Miss in his first season, which is obviously a bad loss. The difference here is that those guys were taking over bad football teams that just fired a head coach and they were brought in to rebuild a football program. If Notre Dame had 3 wins or even 6 wins last year, I don't think I'd be having this conversation. They were an 11-win football team. They played in a New Year's Six Bowl last year. They were in contention for the college football playoff and did not lose that many key starters. The best player that they lost was Kyle Hamilton, and they re-upped at multiple positions. You cannot go from an 11-win team losing your head coach, the guy that you were coaching under, who was willing to just jump ship to another program. You're now leading a program that has high expectations. To lose your third game coaching as the head coach of Notre Dame is really, really bad. It's pathetic. It is a sign of what is to come, and it is proof that he is not ready to lead a big college football program. My last point on this, for those that love to pull the stats on coaches that started their career poorly, I flip it on them. I look and see, I bring up these 2 guys that had 2 fantastic starts to their careers at Notre Dame. Tyrone Willingham and Charlie Weiss both had really strong winning seasons in their first years at Notre Dame. They were competitive Notre Dame teams. They were both 3-loss Notre Dame teams. And they eventually went on to be fired. And in a disgraceful fashion. The start to your coaching career does not mean anything, is the point. It absolutely means nothing for your future success. But when you can't beat an opponent that you are paying to come play you, that is all the evidence that you need to prove that you are not prepared to lead your team and prepare them for the difficult games on your schedule. I've seen enough. They looked soft. They looked unprepared. That is not what Notre Dame football is capable of being. And I feel like I end up talking about this way too much. As a Notre Dame fan, it's very upsetting, them losing to Marshall. I get that he has done a really good job in recruiting. I am concerned that they're slowly losing some of those top recruits, like Keon Keeley is already decommitted from the program and is likely not going to recommit at some point. I'm concerned by that, but albeit he has been a good recruiter and Notre Dame recruiting has been better than it's ever been. That is, I have to give him credit, but I think another counterexample to that is Kevin Sumlin at Texas A&M was a fantastic recruiter. He was a great recruiter. There were so many 5-star recruits that were going to College Station, and they never won shit. They never won anything. So I don't think that is also a justifiable example and a justifiable point to say, hey, he's recruiting well. If the guys aren't prepared to play and you have the talent on the roster, which he already has, and then is going to bring on more talent, it's not going to just suddenly come together. There needs to be something done, and I don't know if it starts with firing Tommy Rees. I don't know how long of a leash Marcus Freeman is going to get, but I'm predicting it now. He is not the man that is going to lead this team to success. Speaking of another coach, so we've got the 3 coaches that are now being questioned for their capabilities to lead their programs. The last one's Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. losing to App State might actually, and I will say this, is the least disgraceful of the Sun Belt losses, because App State is a really good football program, and those dudes fight. Those dudes come to fight. We saw it against North Carolina in week 1, and they did it again in week 2 rather, as they were facing off against Texas A&M. But Haynes King, I hate to admit it, is not the guy. They need to switch to Max Johnson. There is a recoverability to this season somewhat, and I'm going to get to my thoughts on Jimbo in a second. If you want to recover this season, you need to start Max Johnson, because as great of an athlete as Haynes King is, and it's kind of a similar issue with Tyler Buckner at Notre Dame, if you can't complete passes and you can't move the ball through the air and all you're doing is running around and teams play really good contain against you, it is really easy to bottle up and stop a quarterback like that. And that's what Haynes King has been. He's like a 4.4 guy. He's a really good athlete, but he is not a good college quarterback. Max Johnson, albeit LSU fans weren't big fans of him, I watched a lot of his games last year because I was trying to get a sense of who's going to win this quarterback battle. And Haynes King is the better athlete, better equipped to evade pressure and deal with offensive line issues. Max Johnson is at least going to move the ball. He is at least going to be on target with his throws. His decision-making is not great, and he tends to hold the ball a little bit. But I think now, after a couple of weeks seeing the struggles, he only threw for 97 yards in this game against App State. I think you need to start, maybe not next game, but the game after that. You need to prepare to work in Max Johnson at some point, because Haynes King has already shown me enough that I don't think that he is going to get the job done for Texas A&M. Now for Jimbo, though, I don't know how much you can really recover after that, because that's another similar issue of being able to recruit the guys to your program to come play for you, but not preparing them for simple games like that. That means that you were soft in practice the whole week. You were not holding your guys accountable in the locker room, in your fellow coaches. You were not holding them accountable and preparing them for the matchup that was coming up. That all comes down to the head coach. A loss like that comes down to the head coach. This is not like they played Alabama and you lose and you can point to a specific position group or a specific player that struggled and had issues. It's not like that at all. When you lose in a game like this that you're supposed to dominate and that's supposed to be a pay-to-win game, it all comes down to the head coach's inability to prepare your team. Jimbo has at least, unlike Marcus Freeman, has accumulated important wins and resume-building wins at Texas A&M, particularly the upset win that they had against Alabama, where it doesn't necessarily make up for this loss, but he can at least say, okay, we played like crap against App State, but I'm still good enough to lead this team to beat Alabama when we need to. He can make that excuse, which is not a great excuse. He is somebody who, at the end of the season, he's got a little bit of a longer leash, especially because of how long he's tied down for, how much money they're giving him. I'm a little bit less willing to commit to if they need to move on from Jimbo Fisher or not. Because again, he's actually produced results. He's won important games. They've had good records at the end of some of his seasons, winning records. They've been bowl eligible teams. The final point there with Jimbo Fisher is that he has earned himself a little bit of a longer leash. Colin distracted the hell out of me. Can you touch on Holy Cross upset? Yes, I will talk about it, Colin. Jimbo Fisher has a little bit of a longer leash, but if there are multiple other bad losses at the end of the season, the hammer might be coming down in an unexpected fashion and after a game that we might not be expecting. Be prepared. This is one of those that's on a hot seat watch, but not necessarily a full he is going to be fired or needs to be fired, especially because App State is better than I think some people are willing to acknowledge. Second game, and I also did or I guess this is the third game. I did a reaction to this after it was played, and I was sweating the hell out of this game. The Alabama versus Texas game. Texas came to play, and I was at a bar with a bunch of Texas fans watching this game, and I notoriously made a bet with my Texas coworkers that I was watching this game with that if Texas won, I would get a tattoo of a Longhorn on my ass. And by God, I was sweating my ass off the entirety of that game. And I was willing to do it. I was willing to commit to the bit. I was only going to get a really small one because there was no description or agreement on the size of the tattoo, but I was sweating my ass off. And despite the emotion that was behind this game for me, my thoughts are this is a team that is good enough to win the Big 12. I don't think Oklahoma looked that great playing against Kent State. I don't really see any other teams in the Big 12 that are as competitive as this Texas roster was yesterday. They've got some dudes, and they're not like a talented, star-studded defense right now. They were ready and prepared to play, though. Steve Sarkisian got his boys ready to play. Like, that is a guy that gets his players to rally and to show up to fight all 4 quarters. They fought every single down, every single series. They were just slightly outmatched on those final drives where Alabama was able to set themselves up to score and get the field goals that were able to put them in a position to win that game. But if Quinn Ewers, and I don't know the full extent of the injury, Colin, look up the extent of the injury, please, if you can, if you're near a computer. For Quinn Ewers, if he comes back, that is a really good Texas program. That is going to be a one-loss Texas team by the end of the year. Knowing Texas and the way that they always underwhelm, there is a possibility that they'll have a stupid loss in there. But if they play like that every single game this year, even with Hudson Card as the starting quarterback, they are capable of winning the Big 12, and they might even be good enough to make it to the college football playoff, or at the very least, maybe be the 6th team on the outside looking in at the very end of the season. They are a very, very good roster. But I have to, and I said this yesterday again, don't push the panic button on Alabama. Alabama looked, a little bit disjointed. They do not have a go-to receiver, which is causing Bryce Young to struggle. He doesn't have options to go to outside of Jahmyr, and Jahmyr Gibbs was his best receiver in this game. He didn't have a ton of rushing yards because they were using him so much on passing downs and as a receiving weapon. Colin points out Ewers out multiple weeks with a sprained, I think he meant his SC or AC joint. It's one of his shoulder joints. So that means he's coming back by the end of the season. So that's good. Not a super severe injury. Bryce needs to find, and Alabama needs to find, who is going to be that receiving threat. This team can't overly rely on the run game, and it's clear that if you shut it down, you bottle up that run game, that they are a team that will very easily get slowed down and struggle to move the ball through the air. However, the takeaway that we can see from this is that Alabama is still good enough to, against a good football team, a quality above average football team, when it comes down to crunch time, you've got the man leading you that can get the job done to win you a football game in Bryce Young. He's just that freaking good. He's done it all of last year. He won the Heisman Trophy for a reason, and he is going to continue to be a potential Heisman candidate, and this Alabama team is going to remain as one of the top 2 teams in the country. Final point. Georgia, though, has proved that they are still far and away the number 1 team in the country. I said going into this game, Alabama needed to prove that they were better than Georgia in this matchup. I was overlooking Texas. I was completely overlooking Texas in this game, to the point where I was saying that Alabama rather, wanted to get their own blowout win over a reputable program like Georgia did against Oregon. And it would have been more impressive if they won by 20 plus points by traveling to Texas. But instead, it's a close game. They have issues that they need to resolve and that they're going to need to figure out at some point. Georgia is still dominant, though. They have no issues that they need to figure out. They've got talented receivers. They've got 3 elite tight ends. They've got really good running backs. Stetson Bennett is playing better than we expected. Bryce is still the better quarterback. I'm not going to go that far, and I'm not that crazy or stupid to say that. Defensively, though, they are stacked from top to bottom. We learned after this game, again, that Georgia is the best team in the country. So we had some other outcomes that were very exciting, and one that was unexpected from my end. And I think a lot of people were expecting Florida to not dominate and blow out Kentucky, but for them to win. The way that Anthony Richardson played in week 1 against Utah, a good Utah defense, provided a lot of hope. And I went as far as to say is that if Anthony Richardson strings together multiple performances like that, he is going to be one of the top 3 quarterbacks selected. He is also a Heisman candidate. And we came crashing down to reality. That is the reality of Anthony Richardson. I'm still very high on him, but he is far and away one of the most volatile players in college football. He is a guy that is going to have these weeks where he's going to throw for a stupid passing total, 5 touchdowns, 400 yards. He's going to rush for 100 yards. He's going to make the highlight plays. And then he's going to have a game like this against Kentucky, who is not really that much better than Utah. Comparable rosters, comparable teams, comparable coaching staffs, where he makes really stupid throws, makes really weird decisions where you're like, well, where was he looking there? Why did he throw it over there? That one interception, that pick 6 he gave up, is a pretty firm example where you're just sitting on your couch or at the bar going, what the hell was he thinking? Where did he think he was going to go with the ball there? Tanner McKee is not a better NFL draft prospect than Anthony Richardson. Besides the point, Richardson's good enough to help this team win football games. They're going to be a winning program. They're going to be a bowl-eligible team. But the reality that we now see and we are reminded of, that there is volatility to Florida and to Anthony Richardson. I am not going to go as far to say that Kentucky is a vastly dominant team. I think they're good. They are still as good as I expected them to be. They played the way that I thought that they were going to play in this matchup. They were just much more mistake-free than Florida was, and that was why they won. They played a much cleaner game of football. And my credit goes out to Will Levis, who cleaned up issues that he showed in their first game against a crappy MAC opponent. I think it was Miami of Ohio that they played. He had some issues, looked a lot cleaner. Like, that's the Will Levis that we're used to. But very similar to Anthony Richardson, there is going to be volatility in their performances from a week-to-week basis. Will Levis will have a game like he did yesterday against Florida, and then he's going to have a game where he'll make a bunch of mistakes. He'll have 2 fumbles. He'll have an interception. He'll get sacked 4 times, and then you're going to be asking yourself, well, which Will Levis are we going to get? That competition, though, for quarterback 3 in this draft class is going to be very, very interesting. And I'm excited to see how that is going to unfold. Quick thoughts on 2 more games, and then anyone who wants to drop questions in the chat. I know Colin has thrown out a couple points. He wants me to talk about Holy Cross Buffalo. BYU Baylor, I was also proven very wrong on Baylor's capabilities. Blake Shapen, I thought had a decent performance, but BYU is a really well-coached team. I don't think that they necessarily have elite talent across the board. Their best player is Blake Freeland, who is an offensive tackle. But outside of that, like, it's a decent roster. They're just really well coached. They're just always ready to play. And that stadium, when it's rocking, is a hard place to play in. I'm not out on Baylor. I think it's hard to replicate the success that they had last year after losing a lot of guys to the draft, especially Jalen Petrie. You saw some issues with their secondary and some head-scratching instances where they were giving up some chunk plays. There was that one really well-schemed-up quarterback reception play that happened in the red zone for BYU, and they were very out of position and weren't even close to making a play on that football. Jaron Hall looked really good on that play. Fantastic athlete that he is. But I'm not out on Baylor. I think that's David Rand is a really good coach. He's somebody who's going to prepare his team and help them rally. That's just a really strong BYU program. They deserve to be ranked where they are. They're going to be a tough team to beat with the remaining parts of their schedule. They're probably going to make Notre Dame look really stupid, and I'm very glad that I did not buy tickets to go to that game in Allegiant Stadium in Nevada, because I almost did that. But higher on BYU after that game, not losing faith in Baylor. I got to give a shout out. In fullest hack form, I am a supporter of the programs that are dog shit on a week-to-week basis and a year-to-year basis, and suddenly out of nowhere, they're catching a little bit of steam. I'm talking about Kansas. Kansas freaking beat West Virginia. West Virginia looked really good in that week 1 game against Pitt, and Pitt looked really good against Tennessee, who's a really good football program. But what in the hell that we're in a year where Kansas is 2-0, and I think I saw some statistic that they're averaging over 50 yards, or not 50 yards, 50 points a game, over 50 points a game. I'm not saying that Kansas is going to be good. I'm not saying that Kansas is going to be some dominant program, but it's hilarious, and you got to love it for the sake of college football that Kansas is suddenly good, and that they suddenly have some juice behind them. I don't know why. I just get excited when these bad teams suddenly have something redeeming going on, and if they finish with like 7 wins, that's a good year for them. Colin is saying, can you touch on the Holy Cross upset over Buffalo? Yes, I said yesterday that I would not talk about this game because I don't like to give Holy Cross any airtime. I probably won't give them airtime on the FCS show because they are my one sworn enemy besides Southern Illinois. Now they went on a Hail Mary play. I think since Buffalo lost Leopold, their head coach, they have been a struggling program. Holy Cross is good. They're just underrated. It's one of those teams that if you're not ready to play them and you show up haphazardly and you're not ready to knock the crap out of them, you could lose on a Hail Mary play. I think that's the rest of the comments that we've got for today. Folks, thank you for anyone who did hop in during the live. Anyone who is hopping in on the replay, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and also be sure to – we got one more. Does Marshall finish? Nope. Colin, I'm not doing it. I'm not letting you make me mad. You missed the beginning when I was upset. So I'm not doing it. I'm not letting you make me mad. Drop a comment under the video if you're watching the replay to share your thoughts on week 2 of college football. We're going to be coming at you either. I got to figure out if I'm either going to do Monday or Tuesdays for my live prediction shows, my preview shows, but we're going to get that scheduled and figured out. So stay tuned for that and make sure you put that notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of those live streams.